Hi, I'm Sharon Ross with Capital City Arts Initiative. Have the pleasure to be here today at the Nevada State Museum with Curator of Anthropology, Gene Hattori, and he's giving us a Nevada Neighbors tour behind the scenes. Look at the collections, and it's a treat. Gene, talk about what we're doing here.
Yeah, welcome everybody. This is our basketry vault, and unfortunately we can't display all of our baskets. Actually, the Gatekeepers Museum at Lake Tahoe, North Shore, does display their entire collection, but we're not set up to do that. So we offer behind-the-scenes tours on a monthly basis, and if you have family and friends in town and want to show them the state of Nevada's baskets, your baskets, give us a call at the Nevada State Museum and Anthropology Department, and we'd be glad to set up a peek at behind the scenes here at the Nevada State Museum. What we have here are the crown jewels of the Nevada State Museum's basketry collection, our Native American basketry collection. And these are the baskets, the masterworks of Washoe tribal member Datsolali, or Louisa Kaiser as her American name. This shelf, and these two baskets down here are the works of Datsolali. We have a total of 19 Datsolali baskets, from a micro miniature basket, and I'll show that to you in a minute, to a large burden basket that is in a cabinet in the rear of the vault. The baskets that you see here were expressly made for sale. These are baskets that were recorded in a store ledger. Her exclusive purveyors, the Cohns, had the Emporium store here that eventually evolved into the Kit Carson store, which was an Indian arts and crafts store. Once the baskets became actually world known, as well as very popular in American culture with collectors, with Datsolali baskets being the cream of the crop. These were sold to wealthy individuals, oftentimes the wives of wealthy individuals, but also wealthy male collectors too, both on the West Coast and on the East Coast, and points in between. The baskets that were made for sale started out modest. This particular basket was the possession of Dr. Simeon Lemuel Lee, a physician here in town, and he recorded all of his baskets, which form the basis of the state of Nevada's collection. But he purchased this in 1896, and he stated that he purchased it for $20. But within a few years, within less than 10 years, this is a basket that is one of the finer weaves in Datsolali baskets. There's 33 stitches per inch. That particular basket, I believe it was 1904 or so, $2,000. And that was a lot of money back then. And in 2013 dollars, that's when I converted it, purchasing power of $54,000 in 2013 dollars. So not inexpensive, smaller to begin with, and you can see with the differing designs that you have here, she experimented. She had different motifs, and these are not traditional Washoe basketry motifs, the placement, the movement of the designs that you see, design elements. The early basket, this LK2, is more or less a traditional design and traditional placement. Straight up and down, the elements being the same size, and she experimented, and this particular basket, she varied the size and actually the design of some of the elements that you see here. We're often asked, well, what do the designs mean? And when the Washoe were asked, and this is in the 1910s, there's a couple of accounts when they were asked what do the designs mean? And the ladies responded, they don't mean anything. They're our designs. And that isn't necessarily the case with other tribes on the West Coast, and where they had specific either family heraldic designs as well as designs that represented different elements. This would have been called a quail top knot design or a campfire design by other tribes. The storekeepers, trying to enhance the sales, did place names and meanings with the different baskets, but again, that doesn't seem to be the case in terms of asking the washoe as well as looking at the older baskets. Even the shape, we don't see this shape with the historic washoe baskets, the utilitarian baskets that they used for storage as well as cooking. The vast majority of the baskets that we see represented in the front part of the basketry vault and all of these baskets here, and these are all washoe baskets in this case, they are willow for the basic construction materials, and that's what we call the foundation. These are actually called coiled baskets, so there was a coiled foundation of willow rods, and in these baskets the washoe traditionally used a foundation of 3 willow rods that were arranged in a spiral fashion, and hold the spiral together they would take a willow thread and they would sew one coil of the spiral beginning from the middle to the next outside row and form their baskets in that manner. To decorate the baskets, the washoe used a black design element, and that's actually a bracken fern root. And the bracken fern root, when you dig it out of the ground, is kind of a gunmetal gray color, but they enhance the color traditionally by burying it in mud, a reducing atmosphere, and that actually turned the iron black. It enhanced the color. During Datsolali's time, a lot of the ladies would substitute burying it in mud by putting it in a tin can and putting some nails in there and forming a reducing atmosphere to get the nice dark black color. The brown color that you see here is actually a different plant fiber. Instead of using willow, what they did is they substituted redbud, a plant that grows in the Sierra Nevada, and it's a natural color of the bark, and it ranges from a brown to a more reddish color, and both of those materials were most likely traded in. There are some stands of bracken fern locally, but traditionally they probably would have traded it in from the west, people to the west of us, the Maidu, and same with the redbud. It occurs up on the Modoc Plateau, but more common to trade it just directly from the west, where they got their acorns also. One of the things that we find with West Coast, and it's principally Pomo Indian baskets, we have miniature baskets being made, and some of us think that they may have done that as part of the miniature craze, not necessarily for kids, but adults collecting miniatures. They would make doll houses and furnish it with miniature furnishings, and we believe that some of the baskets, the Pomo baskets, were used as miniature decoration for these doll houses, which were quite large, but nevertheless miniature in size. What we have in this case is a small Datsolali miniature basket. And this is a negative basket in that rather than having a willow background, this has a redbud background with willow as the decorative element. Now this isn't Datsolali's smallest accomplishment. She actually wove a basket that was part of the storekeeper's wife's personal collection, and they had a micro miniature basket that 3 of them, woven by Dotso Lawley, 3 of those baskets would easily fit into this basket. It's hard to believe, but I have seen it, and I believe it was recently sold. The basket was contained in a little glass vial, and they advertised it. We see it advertised on their Kit Carson store. There was painted on the outside of the building was, "See the basket the size of a bird shot." And so it was a promotional object. I actually was considering buying that basket to have for our collection. I had some gift money from a donor, and actually Brian Bibby, a co-curator of the Tahoe exhibit at the Nevada Museum of Art, talked me out of it, because for that $7,000 to buy the micro miniature basket the size of a birdshot, I was able to buy 2 twined baskets, and this is another form of weaving, and we didn't have any examples of Dotso Lawley's twining in our collection. So I now admit that Brian was right. I made the right decision based on his recommendation. This is her sister-in-law, and if you look at this, that's a beautiful basket.
Yeah.
It was meant to be viewed from this side. You can see how different it looks if you take a really close look. This is the work surface. So when she was sewing the basket, she was taking extra care to punch her needle, and you see the gaps where she changed. Here's the new thread. Here's LK. This is LK37. The splices for the design really show. And it's because she wasn't that concerned with it. It was meant to be viewed from the exterior. But other weavers, it did matter to them, and they did take extra pains to make sure the inside looked very pure and clean. There's an art historian. He's retired now, but he analyzed these from an art historian's and artist's perspective. And this basket, he pointed out, was meant to be viewed from just certain angles. And what she did, and it's very sophisticated, he pointed out, was she intentionally placed 2 vertical lines outlined by slightly curved lines. And he was talking about this is a nice transition from a vertical design element to the curvature of the side of the basket. And he said, this is something that sophisticated artists do. And she was a sophisticated artist. This is a mush stick or a stirring stick, and the loop end is used to take a rock out of the fire, a rounded river rock that had no more moisture in it, and then you would clean it in another basket filled with water and then put it into your cooking basket, where it would immediately start to boil, and you would immediately start to stir it with this stick to keep it from burning the basket as well as cooking the food. This is a coiled cooking basket from the Dr. S.L. Lee collection, and you can see his catalog number inside there. But you can see the wear on the inside of the basket, as well as the plugged hole right there to keep the contents from flowing out the bottom. You would put the fixings for a stew or a soup in there, and then put the hot rocks in there and start stirring with the mush stick And you can see how the sides of the basket and the base of the basket has been worn away from the rocks as well as the stirring stick. The basket also is at least twice as heavy as a basket that hasn't been used for cooking, because it's soaked up all of the fats and some grit, probably from the food that was prepared in it. You can see, get an idea of how a coiled basket is constructed by the foundation rods. There's 3 willow rods here, and you can get an idea of the spiral placement of the foundation and how it's sewn together by an individual willow or redbud thread. And there's actually a bracken fern root thread there. So here's a Western Shoshone basket. Actually, that's a Star of David and an interpretation of a menorah. You can see what the Western Shoshone did is they like to weave very colorful, bright baskets. And as you can see from this basket, they customized the designs to what the customer either wanted or what they believed would sell. What they did to decorate the baskets was they substituted colored threads that were dyed with aniline dyes, synthetic dyes that were available at that time. And although very bright when freshly dyed and woven into the basket, they faded very badly if exposed to any light. And they'd place this in a stream with the opening facing downstream. Very small one for, minnow-sized fish, and they had larger ones for larger fish. They were made, they're temporary tools that were made. And they also netted, and they also speared, and they also had hooks. This is willow, and this is washoe. The Paiutes also did a similar thing.
Today we're at the Nevada State Museum with Curator of Anthropology, Gene Hattori, who is showing us the Anthropology collection room, and we are seeing some amazing artifacts.
Back in the mid-1970s, the Nevada State Museum had an archaeological survey, a group of archaeologists that did projects for the various companies and in this case, the Federal Highways Administration, NDOT, for the completion of Interstate 80. One of the last sections of I-80 that was worked on was the Lovelock section, and it went through the former Lovelock Chinese community, or the Lovelock Chinatown. One of the foci of the archaeological dig was a section of the route, the right-of-way that contained these buildings, standing structures that were the homes and businesses of the Lovelock Chinese. And in this case, it was on private property owned by Judge Clifford Young, who was a prominent figure here in Carson City, as well as Lovelock, the Young family. And they repurposed line shacks and brought them into town for use of the Chinese. The artifacts that we studied in depth, very well preserved artifacts that were left behind by the Chinese when they left the area in the 1930s, were contained in the attics of these structures. What you see here are some of the objects that were recovered archaeologically and also from the buildings, the attics of the buildings, that were eventually destroyed for the completion of I-80 through Lovelock. It's fairly obvious that the paper material, well-preserved objects, are the materials contained in the trunks and the boxes. We have commercial objects, and in one of the buildings we had the proverbial Chinese laundry, and we have the laundry stamp right here, the business stamp, and this is a positive of it. And this is Hopley Chinese Laundry, Lovelock, Nevada. And then we have some of the seals that the merchant used for correspondence and official business-related documents. And another very interesting thing that we had going on in the Lovelock Chinatown was a gambling establishment, or gaming establishment. And what we had here is the house's version of a Chinese lottery, or Keno, the predecessor of Keno. And you can see the games, and this is the document that has the record of the game right here. And then other gaming related things are die, and this is a Chinese die with the prominent red, well, it's faded red, but the prominent one that we use as an indicator for Chinese die. Found a number of Chinese coins on the site, not necessarily used as coinage, but probably used in terms of the some of the gaming tokens. And then similarly with the domino piece right there, it's a marker for gaming, Chinese games. And then a Faro marker, a Euro-American gaming piece right there. Another unusual factor about the Lovelock Chinatown compared to other Chinese communities in 19th and early 20th century Nevada, we have the presence of children represented in the archaeological record. And it's unusual because we commonly view the Chinese community as a bachelor community. And this is borne out in the literature. And very few women were present during the early days and into the later period because of restricted immigration laws, as well as just general prejudice against the Chinese. It's not a nice place to live in some respects until the townspeople got to know the Chinese residents. And we have a good example of that in the Lovelock Chinatown with the Chang family. And you can see here the obvious games. We have a jack ball and a toy cap pistol and some, I guess call them frozen Charlotte doll heads, as well as marbles. Over here we have more merchant related things. This is a store ledger right here that records transactions, as well as what needs to be ordered in the future from the store, for the store, I should say. As you can see, for this shipping container, it originated in China and was shipped to Lovelock and probably on the railroad, and it originally contained probably some sort of foodstuff, anything from tea to pickled vegetables. We have a number of containers for the pickled vegetables and sauces and that we found elsewhere in the site, but they repurposed the boxes for use to hold their possessions. What we have that you can see in this tray are some of the prehistoric baskets, and this basket is of particular interest to us in that it is the oldest coiled basket that we have from the Western Great Basin. And this, we actually radiocarbon dated this to 4,400 years ago. And the basic construction techniques of this basket are those that were used historically by the Washoe Indians. And today, this archaeological site is clearly within northern Paiute territory, but these coiled baskets, this is just one of many, but it happens to be the oldest one, Again, follow the specific 3-rod coiled top rod split all willow baskets that the Washoe made. The coiled basketry was not that common for that particular time period, and most of the baskets from that time period at this site or series of sites were what we call twined baskets, and that's what this particular artifact is a twined bowl or possibly even a cap. Got some fancy finish on the edge here. As with the coiled basket, this is also 4,400 years in age, and it's all willow. Not so with the other types of baskets found for that particular time period. This is a fragment of again, what we call twined basket, but this is made out of tules. One of the things that we commonly associate with the prehistoric Native Americans in the state are the projectile points or arrowheads. This particular site was of particular interest because clearly half of the projectile points for this particular time period were not stone-tipped projectiles, but just sharpened ends. And I shouldn't say just sharpened ends because this is a very specialized sharpened end. You can see the grooves here. That's actually a spiral groove, and it's designed so that once it enters the prey, the most common big game animal that was hunted was bighorn, but once it enters the prey, it breaks off, which you can see with some of the fragments that we have here. And in that way, the tip would break off and be in the animal, and this is greasewood, which is an obnoxious, slightly toxic wood. If you get stuck with greasewood, it festers very easily. And you could recover the remainder of your dart. And I say dart because it was not an arrow and bow setup, but an addle-addle, and this is the foreshaft for the addle-addle dart. It was an addle-addle and addle-addle dart hunting tools, and this is a fragment of an addle-addle or throwing stick, and the handle end of it is missing, but this served as a lever in propelling a dart, and it added more power. Act as the lever, more power. When the occupants of the Winnemucca Lake site were occupying the site about 4,400 years ago, it was a different climate than we have today. It was actually cooler and wetter. And so we had a lake where we have a playa today, but that's partially as a result of water diversion from the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. But this was a period when there were marshes down at the south end of the lake, and the lake itself had cutthroat trout and kuiui or kiwi that lived in the lake and the people exploited. One of the factors that influenced trade in Nevada, even back then, was the abundance of rock and mineral resources. And what the local Native Americans traded was paint, pigment like ochre, as well as some of the metamorphic rocks, some of the schists, shiny schists that were fashioned into ornaments and traded down to the coast, as well as tool stones like basalt, volcanic basalt, and obsidian. But what we got in return were seashells. And here we have a fragment of a large pendant made out of green abalone, and this is Haliotis fulgens. And today, the distribution of this particular abalone shellfish is south of Point Conception, California. So it was a more southern species. Um, this ornament is black abalone, and black ab is today common up and down the seacoast, or at least historically common up and down the seacoast, the Pacific Ocean, from Baja to Washington State, and probably points north of that too. And in addition to the large seashells, there were some shaped ornaments that were also received in trade. And here you can see some abalone shell ornaments fashioned to look like buttons of some sort. And we find some of these objects in California embedded in asphaltum, even these discs with holes in them, embedded in different stone artifacts, either pendants or I've seen pipes with smaller abalone shell ornamentation. This particular tray are the olivella shell ornaments, largely beads, actually almost all beads here, and from large olivella shell beads to the very small barrel-shaped olivella seed beads or shell beads that are still on the original strands. And of particular interest to us also are these local pieces of jewelry, and we have some strand of fish vertebrae here, and these are some sort of, these are a trout, probably cutthroat trout vertebrae on this particular strand, and these are juniper seed beads right here. Here's the juniper seed bead and rabbit foot bone necklace, and of particular interest on this particular necklace are some small white, probably can't see it very well, but we have some small white beads here, and those are the, or is the telson or stinger of a scorpion. And for whatever reason, there's about 5 or 6 of those on this particular piece of jewelry. They only use the stinger, even though all segments of the tail could probably have been strung on that necklace right there. Okay, another really interesting find at this archaeological site at Winnemucca Lake were these western pond turtle shell ornaments. And there was a discussion in the literature, that dates back to the 1950s. And earlier, in 1861, a scientist from the California Academy of Sciences observed western pond turtles, Chlamys marmorata, in the marshes in the Carson Valley. And he noted that these were probably brought in by the settlers and the prospectors from California and planted in Carson Valley to serve as a future food source for the settlers. They were viewed kind of as a delicacy in the gold rush. But here we have it 4,400 years ago at Winnemucca Lake, clearly not brought in by Euro-American settlers. It doesn't mean that they weren't necessarily not brought in by Native Americans or traded in by Native Americans, but we do find them in the Truckee River drainage and Carson River drainages, and arguably in the Humboldt River drainage archaeological sites. These particular pond turtles, you can see some of the holes drilled there to serve as ornaments, and then this comb-looking device may have served as some sort of comb, but we also find bones, largely rabbit or bird bones, that have these same little circular holes drilled out, and they were made as bead blanks for tiny perforated circular beads. If you want to get in touch with us, you can check out our website, and it has a staff directory which has our direct lines. We also have a website that will have special events listed for the anthropology department. Oftentimes we'll have a speaker for the Francis Humphrey Lecture Series that will talk on Native American topics, as well as special temporary exhibits that may show up at various times of the year.
Thank you to Dr. Gene Hattori for this amazing tour of behind the scenes in the Nevada State Museum. We appreciate all of the work from the museum and the support from our members and funders who will be listed on the following slide. Thank you.